is TJ Putnam's project on organelles. So first up we have the cell wall / the cell membrane, and the cell membrane is found in every cell, but the cell wall is only found in a few prokaryotic cells and the plant cells. And basically what they do is they protect the cell and they regulate entry and exit into the cell. I like to think of the membrane and a little bit of the wall as like a bouncer at a club. And basically they decide who goes in and who goes out. But one thing about the cell wall is that it also provides structure, and it makes the plant cell, it keeps the pressure under control so that it gives it like a nice rigid structure. Next is the cytoplasm. All cells have cytoplasm, and what the cytoplasm does is it's this jelly-like liquid, and it contains the organelles and basically provides space for the organelles. And the cytoplasm I like to relate to as a warehouse, sort of like a big space for all of the equipment, people, whatever, just gives it space. So next is the central vacuole, and that's only found in plant cells. And what its job is to store water and nutrients. And that's in plant cells because plants don't really eat anything. They have to absorb their nutrients, and therefore they have to keep their nutrients in a safe space. And now I like to relate the central vacuole to a storage room in maybe like a storage closet or a storage room in a store or something like that. Like it stores basically everything you need for the cell. Next is the chloroplasts and the mitochondria, and now the chloroplasts are only found in a few bacteria, but mostly you see them in plants, and mitochondria are found in pretty much all eukaryotic cells. But basically they do the same thing. They produce energy for the cell, but they do them in different ways. What the chloroplast does is that it is the site for photosynthesis, and basically that takes sun and a few other components and turns it into sugar. And in the mitochondria, it has cellular respiration, and that's what happens when different foods and nutrients are broken down into ATP. And I like to relate the mitochondria to a power plant. It sort of like produces all of the power for the cell, or at least most of it. And then the chloroplast I like to relate to a solar panel, because it uses the sun to do the same thing and produce energy. Alright, next is the nucleus. And basically what the nucleus does is that every eukaryotic cell has it, and it controls the cell, and it holds the DNA. And what I like to relate this to is the air traffic control tower. And it basically tells everything what to do. It holds all the instructions, etc. Next are the ribosomes. And what the ribosomes do are actually really important because they produce proteins, which are the macromolecules that do pretty much everything. And so they can either be found free-floating in the cytoplasm, or they can be found attached to the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And basically, their only job is to produce proteins, and it's a really important job. And what I like to relate it to is factory equipment. So the factory equipment produces all sorts of products for different purposes, and it really cranks them out, just like the ribosomes. Next is the Golgi Apparatus, and basically what it does is it takes the proteins that the ribosomes created, and it packages them and transports them. And what it does when it transports them is that it basically ships them off to somewhere else in the organism to be used. Usually if a protein is being used inside the cell that it's created, it'll be created by the free-floating ribosomes and not the ribosomes on the endoplasmic reticulum. And so what I like to relate this to is kind of like UPS or Amazon or like the post office. because it takes the proteins and it ships them off to where they need to go. Next is the smooth and rough ER, or endoplasmic reticulum, and they're usually found around the nucleus, and they function similarly, but they do different things. So what they do is they produce macromolecules, and like the proteins are produced by the ribosomes on the rough ER, because the ribosomes are attached to the endoplasmic reticulum, which is what gives it its rough name. And both of them help transport the things that they produce, since they take up a good bit of the cell in most cases. And for the smooth ER, it produces lipids and steroids. Since it doesn't have those ribosomes, it doesn't produce proteins, but it does produce things like the rough ER. And what I like to relate those to is kind of like a factory, but not necessarily just one random factory. I think of them as like two different factories that produce two different products for the same brand. For instance, you could have two different types of shoes for Adidas, and obviously they're different and they require different kind of like different factory components, but essentially they are both buildings that produce some sort of product, and that's kind of what both of the ERs do. So next is lysosomes, and these guys are kind of like the janitors of the cell. They break down waste and food into smaller bits that they can reuse and recycle and all that. And sometimes they're called suicide cells because if like there's something wrong with the cell, then one of the lysosomes could burst, and it would release all that toxic waste and stuff like that into the cell and effectively kill the cell, hence the name suicide sacs. Like I said before, these are like the janitors, but they also could be considered the like a hazmat disposal unit, because it takes that toxic waste and it uses enzymes to break it down in a safe manner where it doesn't harm the rest of the cell, most of the time anyways. Last but not least are the centrioles, and the centrioles are only found in animal cells because their plant cells have their own little thing going on. And basically what the centrioles do they help in mitosis, and basically they help divide the cell and divide the organelles into one side or the other of the cell. And what I like to relate these to is kind of like ushers at some sort of event. Basically what the ushers do is that they direct people to their seats on like maybe one section or the other, or in the front or the back, or anything like that. And they help to kind of divide the population, and that's kind of what centrioles do with the organelles when they help out with mitosis. And those are the organelles and their functions and analogies.